Prince Harry wanted to interview Putin and Trump for his podcast about childhood trauma. The idea of speaking to controversial figures was allegedly raised with producers in the US during discussions about potential shows. The Duke of Sussex wanted to interview Vladimir Putin, Mark Zuckerberg and Donald Trump for a podcast about childhood and parenting trauma, it has been reported. Welcome to Royal Pancakes. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notifications bell, so you don't miss anything about the British royal family. The Duke allegedly discussed his ideas for potential podcast shows with several producers and production houses in the US, telling them he hoped to talk to the controversial figures about their early formative years. He also had the idea of speaking to the Pope about religion on a podcast addressing major societal issues of the day such as climate change, according to reports in Bloomberg. It comes after a Spotify executive labeled the Duke and Duchess enthusiasts last week after announcing that Meghan's podcast, The Archetypes, would be dropped after just one season. Bill Simmons, Spotify's head of podcast innovation and monetization, blasted the duo on his podcast, saying, "I wish I had been involved in the Meghan and Harry leaving Spotify negotiations." The couple signed a multi-year Spotify deal, worth around $20 million in 2020, shortly after stepping down as working members of the royal family and leaving the UK. The deal, announced by Spotify in December of that year, promised that the Sussexes would produce podcasts and shows, the first of which was announced in 2021. Ultimately, the couple's deal resulted in only one series, the 12-episode Originals, which was released in 2022. Bloomberg reports that the Duke's thoughts for his own series, including one on fatherhood, are separate from a discussion of how the controversial characters' upbringing has made them the adults they are today. However, the practicality of securing interviews with guests like Putin, Trump, and Zuckerberg has allegedly been sparked by members of Duke's podcast team. Mr. Simmons poked fun at the Duke's thoughts on his podcast last week but declined to go into any detail, saying, "I have to drink one night and tell a Zoom story I got with Harry to try and help him with the podcast idea. It's one of my best stories." However, a Spotify executive in January, following the release of the Duke's tell-all memoir, slammed Spare, saying he was extremely embarrassed to be with him on Spotify. "What does he do?" asked Mr. Simmons. "It's one of those things where it's like, what's your talent? Why are we listening to you? You were born into royalty and then left. You sell documentaries and podcasts, and nobody cares what you have to say about anything unless you talk about the royal family, and you just complain about them." A Sussex's spokesperson said, "The team behind Archetypes remains proud of the podcast they created at Spotify. Meghan continues to develop more content for the Archetypes audience on another platform." The Originals became one of the most listened to podcasts on Spotify when it first aired last August. Talks for a second series have been ongoing, but are said to have been stalled for months. The podcast was released weekly, and each episode focused on different ratings and stereotypes directed against women. Notable guests included Serena Williams, tennis star and friend of the Duchess, and singer Mariah Carey. Archewell and Spotify have been contacted for comment.